All right, good evening. I would like to call to order the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority study session on August 15th, 2022. For those who might be tuning in and are regularly looking for the City Council study session, stay tuned and you'll see what a little bit of a difference is going forward tonight. And if you'd like to join for the public input piece, the web ID is 853-5668-2258. By telephone, it's going to be 720-707-2699 with the webinar ID of 853-5668-2258. Press double pound and that'll get you in, and then you'll have that opportunity to engage. So before we take roll call, I'd certainly like to welcome our new commissioners who are joining us this evening. Commissioner Miller, Wolfram, Kerr, and Barraway. And for some of our newer council members, we'll have a great 101 on urban renewal and all things in between. So it should be a great night with a lot of information. And this is really information only through the presentations. And so I know there'll be a lot of questions, and we certainly welcome those as we move forward. So with that, will the clerk please call the roll?
Paul.
Here.
Abel.
Here.
Fairway.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Jansen.
Here.
Kerr.
Here.
Mayotte Guerrero.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Olver.
Here.
Jarazai.
Here.
Springsteen. Stewart.
Here.
Strom. Vincent.
Here.
Wolfram.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Great. I didn't hear the record, but let the record note that Commissioner Strom is here. I'm not sure if we heard that or
Yep.
not.
Okay,
Thank
got
you.
it fixed. I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so this is the first meeting of the expanded Lra Board of Commissioners since this Lakewood City Council approved this expansion in March of 2022 via Lakewood Council Resolution 2022-25. Mr. Smith, Director of our Economic Development team, will lead the presentation tonight, and also note that this was on Lakewood Speaks and still is, as well as a comment that came through. So with that, Mr. Smith, please take it over.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor. Very much appreciate being here tonight. It's a bit of a historic evening. As you mentioned, this is the first meeting of the expanded Lra board since the council approved that expansion in March. We are the first city in Jefferson County to do this expansion under the Colorado Urban Redevelopment Fairness Act, which we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along the way. We're not the first city in Colorado to do this, so we've learned lessons and whatnot from all of the other cities that have expanded that way. But we hope to be a model so that other cities in Jeffco will probably wind up following us somewhere in the near future. So expansion of those cities may come forward here in the next couple of years. Tonight's a study session, so there's no decisions being made. There's no votes being taken. The goal is to bring everyone together digitally here tonight to present and talk about the many elements of urban renewal and the LRA. Some folks tonight have a lot of experience with the material. Some folks are relatively new to the material. So the goal is to meet commissioners where they're at and to build on that knowledge base with the information that we're sharing tonight. Often when new folks join a board, you wind up being sent a bunch of information, thousands of pages to read. Back in the old days, we used to have 3-ring binders and we'd put them in there and get that information. We purposely decided not to do that, not to overwhelm folks. As we go through the presentation tonight, there's lots of places where the documents are listed as to where we got that information from, and would like to invite folks, if they would like to get a copy of that, just let us know. We're happy to do that. If we send a copy of something to one commissioner, we'll send it to all of the commissioners just to make sure everybody has the same access to those materials. So that's where we're at. The presentation tonight is basically in 2 parts with a lot of information to be shared. I'm going to do my best to keep it zippy and zesty, and so folks can hopefully get to the back end of the material and be feeling okay about that. We have it in two parts: an overview of the LRA, and then we have a little bit on one of the specific areas of the LRA, Alameda 1 corridor. We'll do a check-in at that point. I'll defer back to the chair, see if we want to keep going or answer questions or ask questions about the generality of it. If we decide that that information about the Alameda corridor is just a little bit too much to bite off tonight, we can defer it to a future study session and get that information in. The goal is to have all of the commissioners have some information about each of the urban renewal areas that we'll work with. So jumping right in, I'm going to share my screen and get into the meat of the presentation. Hang on. All right, I'm going to assume that we can see that. Everybody, we're good? Sounds terrific. Okay, so we're going to start with the title slide. Hang on just a second. Title slide, why is the LRA different than it was before? The Urban Renewal Law is CRS 3125-101, and then that lawyerly language there is at SEEK. It basically means all of the following. So that's the whole kit and caboodle of the Urban Renewal Law. One of the new changes, or relatively new changes, I should say, last 4 or 5 years, is the Colorado Urban Redevelopment Fairness Act. It was known as House Bill 151348. Passed in the 2015 session, was acted in the beginning of 2016. And it said essentially that if urban renewal areas wanted to do new urban renewal areas, or they wanted to make substantial changes to their existing urban renewal areas, they had to do a couple of things: expand the board and essentially invite the taxing entity organizations to the table. We've done that. We know that lots of folks were involved with that. I know that the West Metro fire folks were amongst those that lobbied for this. We think it's a great change. And now we've got all of those folks around this digital table starting tonight. And so we're very hopeful that we can accomplish great things here with urban renewal coming up in the future. The Lakewood City Council passed a resolution in 1998, which made the city council members of the Urban Renewal Board. We're known as the Board of Commissioners. All the folks that are here are commissioners tonight. The chair of the commissioners is Mr. Paul. And then the Lakewood City Council passed that resolution that Mr. Paul referred to, 2022-25. So who's on this board? These are all the LRA commissioners that you see in front of you. Of course, we have the chair at the top of that list. All the rest of the commissioners are listed in alphabetical order by last name, which is good news for Commissioner Vincent, because she's no longer last on that list. We're happy to welcome aboard Carolyn Wolfram, who gives us a W at the back end of the alphabet. So she's right in here. She's here tonight and representing 5 other special districts in the area. Those districts got together and put Miss Carolyn on our board here to work with. So we're very excited to have you on here and be part of that. So very much appreciate that you're here this evening. Susan Miller is from the Jeffco School District. She's a commissioner as well. She's also a school board member, and it's kind of interesting in urban renewal speak. The school districts kind of have a special relationship. The increment capture that happens with the tax dollars up there, and we'll talk more about these kinds of things, are actually reimbursed by the state. So they're one of the few entities that gets a reimbursement from the state for those dollars on there. I'll mention Commissioner Barraway is with us this evening. She's a special representative, has a great deal of depth of experience being a former council member, also very involved with the West Colfax Community Association, as well as property owner and investment in the Alameda Connects corridor business improvement district and the Alameda Connects organization. So lots of representation there. And then I'll mention Commissioner Andy Kerr. And of course, Andy Kerr is one of those folks that is in the commission of the Jeffco County Commissioners. So he's a commissioner outside of being a commissioner here at the LRA. So you could accurately call him Commissioner Kerr, but we wouldn't want to do that because when commissioners are here within the LRA, the idea is that all of us are involved with promoting the mission of the LRA. And we'll talk a little bit more about that mission, but everybody is involved with that. There are no geographic areas, so council people that were elected in one area of town are now associated for the purposes of the LRA with the LRA area. So if you're on one end of town as a council person and the LRA areas are on the other end of town, when we're in this meeting, we're all involved with the LRA mission. We have key LRA staff. I am the executive director of the LRA. I'm also a secretary, which is a non-voting position on here. Over on the right are the documents that allow members of the Lakewood city staff to function in the LRA key staff positions on there. And then you see that we have a general counsel is of course the city attorney, Allison McKinney Brown. And then we have Holly Bjorklund is the treasurer. She's also the CFO on the city side here. J. Rob is the LRA clerk as well as the clerk for the city. Kathy Hodson, city manager here, doesn't have a titled role in here, but obviously a very key staff member for the LRA. Then Laura Moody and Nicole Stair. One of the folks I didn't mention is we have a special counsel. It's Mr. Corey Hoffman right there in the middle. Hoffman, Parker, Wilson, and Carberry is the organization for which he works. They're some of the best in the business. A good portion of their practice involves urban renewal. And so they're here as special counsel to help us facilitate this expansion and move forward. So we're very happy to have them here. So what's the purpose of the urban renewal? The urban renewal activities are primarily focused on three things. And the first one is really the most important here. It's the mitigating of blighting conditions within project areas. That's pretty much what the statute wants us to do. That's the whole part of it, is mitigate those blighting conditions. We put on here that we also help to facilitate private investment in project areas, and we enhance Lakewood's ability to preserve and restore the vitality and quality of life within the project areas. But almost always you can focus in on mitigating blighting conditions as what we are all about. Lakewood has 4 urban renewal project areas. You see a generalized map of the urban renewal areas up on the screen. Colfax Avenue and Alameda Avenue are pointed out. There are 2 urban renewal areas along Colfax. There is an urban renewal project area along Alameda that has 2 clocks, if you will, or 2 urban renewal areas on there. Easiest way to think about that is 2 separate areas. We are managed each and every year by a budget. This is an operating budget. Most of the higher dollar initiatives that we do come through a special recognition or a special resolution to allow us to do those initiatives. Most of the operating budgets, the day-to-day, the previous commission, or the previous commitments, all in the 2022 urban renewal budget. We'll also have an urban renewal budget coming up, and it's the responsibility of this body to pass that budget. So we'll talk more about that. But again, operational budget does most of the day-to-day work. Any kind of high dollar or beggar dollar initiatives come through special resolutions and budget exceptions. So LRA board participation, folks were asking these questions before. Once we're past the initial phases here of expanding this board and getting everybody up to speed with that foundation, we're anticipating about a once a quarter or once every 2 month kind of a meeting schedule. To the end of the year 2023, we're probably going to be on about a monthly schedule roughly on there. We've scheduled a couple of study sessions already to work with the budget, and we've also scheduled a business meeting in order to pass the budget. That'll happen in October. I'll talk about those dates in just a little bit, but we also probably need to schedule at least one other business meeting and perhaps 2 before we get done with 2022. So we'll need to hold more meetings during the initial phases here. Traditionally, we've connected the city council meeting days with the LRA meetings, which is Monday night after the council meeting. That may or may not work out for the expanded board as we move along here, but that's kind of the path that we're headed down there. Love to get some input from folks on how that might work out for us. Really easy to think of this as the 11 original council members as part of the board, the original LRA board plus 4. We don't want to do that. That's not what this is about. We want to put the big Ghostbuster symbol through that 11 plus 4 and make a recognition that this is a board of 15. All of the commissioners have equal weight in there. And of course, the chair has additional responsibilities. But all 15 members, very important to what we're getting done. So there's an interesting sort of a relationship between city council and urban renewal boards. City council has 11 seats, as most of you know, all of you know, I assume. And the city council designates blighted urban renewal areas. And those areas are called projects. We do our best not to refer to other things as projects, but it's kind of difficult because we also refer to lots of other things in our other boards and whatnot as projects. But the whole of the area is the project area. things that we do or tasks that we undertake are known as activities or undertakings. So we try to refer to those tasks as activities or undertakings. In the past, the City Council has approved 4 urban renewal areas. I mentioned them before: Colfax and Wadsworth. We often call it Creekside because it's the Creekside Shopping Center on the northeast corner of Colfax and Wadsworth. It has the Walmart Supercenter there. We have the Alameda Corridor 1, which is Sheridan to Ammons and Allison. It's a little bit jagged over there on the western side. It's basically everything along the Alameda Corridor immediately adjacent to it, other than Belmar. Alameda Corridor number 2 is Belmar. It's the area that we refer to as Belmar most of the time, or what most people think of as Belmar. And then the West Colfax Corridor, which is Sims all the way over to Sheridan, excluding that Colfax and Wadsworth Creekside project. So the 15 LRA board members oversee the implementation of the urban renewal project plans for each of those projects areas. We're implementers of those plans. So that's where we're headed, overseeing the tasks that, again, we call them activities or undertakings. We do that through resolutions. So we approve resolutions. I should say the Urban Renewal Board of Commissioners approves resolutions. We approve an annual budget, and we've always mirrored that process with the city's budget process, which takes place from August to October each year. And as I mentioned, we've got a study session set up for the budget, as well as that business meeting in October. Hopefully that's going to work out. And then submit the approved budget to the Department of Local Affairs with the state. Of course, the staff takes care of that once the budget is approved. And we do that every year. So some potential tasks or activities that the LRA might take on here in 2022 and 2023. Again, we're going to approve that operating budget, or we need to approve an operating budget. That study session is set up for the 19th of September 19th. And then the meeting scheduled to approve the resolution is on October the 17th, 2022. We will work with the existing and potentially new urban renewal project areas. We will have to do some tweaks to the bylaws a little bit, but that'll be a business meeting somewhere down the road here, further into the year. We need to do an in-depth on the 4 URA project areas, including a study session, which we've tentatively set up for the 26th to talk about some of those areas. At the tail end of tonight, if we have the capacity and we want to go that distance, we'll talk about one of those areas. We'll do one of the more in-depth this evening. But if we get to that place, we've got a lot of questions and discussions of the general part of it. We'll push that off to the next study session. We'll have to approve IGAs for new urban renewal project areas if we take on any new urban renewal project areas in the near future. The House Bill 1513-48 requires that we have IGAs with all of the taxing entities if we have new areas or substantially modified areas. So if we head that direction and we take on those tasks, we'll need to do those approvals of the IGAs. They're a 3-way approval, by the way. The LRA approves them, the City Council approves them, and then the taxing entity also approves them. So all 3 are involved in those agreements. We'll consider some property acquisitions. One of the things that we can do to have a catalytic effect on those mitigating those blighting conditions is to temporarily control properties and acquire those properties. Lots of folks jump ahead on that acquisition and say, oh, acquire that through condemnation or eminent domain. And the answer is no. We can acquire properties just by purchasing them and work through them. And then consider relocation policies. We have policies for 2 of the 4 areas. We may want relocation policies for other areas. And that allows us to compensate for relocating businesses and whatnot out of those areas, if that comes to that. So the first area we'll talk about is the Colfax Wadsworth reinvestment area. You see a map of that up on your screen. As I mentioned, northeast corner of Wadsworth and Colfax. It's the Walmart Supercenter up there, and then some retail that runs along Colfax Avenue. There's also a very strong drainage way in there, a lot of green space, that sort of thing. That's really what this urban renewal area funded, was that mitigation of the drainage issue that's in there that allowed for that redevelopment of the old Kmart store there. Was adopted in 1999. The year that the increment capture is complete is 2024. Just so you know, the statute includes 25 years of collecting that increment tax. And we'll talk about more how that comes about, but there's 25 years. Property taxes are always happen in arrears. So what we will do is the wrap up of that increment will probably occur in 2025 when we get the 2024 property taxes that come in during that time. So those are just years that are identified on there so that you know when 25 years from the time the blight designation happened. You see the West Alameda Corridor reinvestment area. We've got a project area that goes all the way from Sheridan out to, as I mentioned, Emmons or Allison out there on the west end. It's a big area, and there's actually two clocks, if you will, two areas with two sets of timings on them. We refer to them as Alameda 1 and Alameda 2. That's the whole of the area that you see right there. As I outline the area on top here, that's Alameda 1. So that was adopted in 1998. The year that increment is complete, 2023. Again, property taxes collected in arrears. So 2024 is when that increment will wrap up. One of the activities that we've done over there is the Alameda Streetscape project. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then Belmar is where you see right there in front of it. It was adopted in 2000. It'll wrap up the increment capture in 2025. And the biggest activity there was creating Belmar. You may remember the old Villa Italia shopping center was demolished and replaced by essentially a brand new street grid and all of that sort of thing in the Belmar project. The West Colfax Avenue Corridor Reinvestment Area. You can see that that one's a rather large area. There's about 700 properties in there. It runs all the way from Sims up to Sheridan and a couple of blocks to either side of Colfax. As I mentioned, about 700 some odd properties in there. When that was brought into the area, or when we were talking about that back in 2005, the original study area was a little larger. But there was a energetic go-getter at the Rocky Mountain News that wrote an article about it, indicated that the aggregate value of all of those properties at that time was about $1 billion. And so as I was talking with Mr. Abel about that at one point, he invited me to go read that article, and I went back and looked it up, and sure enough, that's where it was. And so the value of what was in there, roughly $1 billion, not hard to get to that math. If you think about 700 properties, each at $1 million a piece, that's $700 million right there. If you think about the properties that also are 2 and 3 and 4 and $20 million, it makes it really easy to see how you get up to that $1 billion value. The nice thing about urban renewal, though, is that $1 billion value before the urban renewal area was declared is still that $1 billion value the day after it's declared, and in the weeks and months after that, with the increase in whatever the economic market rate goes up in there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But as I mentioned, 700 projects or 700 properties was adopted in 2005. 2030 is when that one, the increment capture is at the end there. And again, property tax in arrear on there, take it to the next year. So a couple of key takeaways to take away from that. One is that dollars generated in an urban renewal project area must be invested back into that very same project area. So we can't take dollars that were generated in Colfax and use them on Alameda. Can't do the opposite, have dollars that were generated in Alameda and use them on Colfax. You have to use them within the urban renewal areas from which they were generated. Another part of that key takeaway is that other parts of the community, the city, aren't contributing through the payment of their property taxes for the blight mitigation in that property area. So again, if you're on one end of the city and the urban renewal areas are on the other, the properties over on the far end of the city are not contributing to the blight mitigation through their property taxes on that side. So a quick snapshot of the urban renewal areas, the existing ones on there. We've got them all side by side. We mentioned the Colfax and Wadsworth one. We've got the 2 Alameda ones in the middle, and then the West Colfax corridor there on the end. As we establish those areas, there is a blight declaration, and there is the adoption of an urban renewal redevelopment plan. Those two acts usually take place together in the same resolution, or at least they have historically, and we'll mention that a little bit later. But there's two things that happen there. You have a clock that starts for a 25-year increment capture, and then you begin capturing that increment, those dollars. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about how that comes in there. You see those dates over there with the wrap up in, and again, collected in arrears, so it's probably the year after that wraps up on there. But the clock, we wanted to put this in terms where we say how much time is left in each of these areas, and how about the use of the funds in order to mitigate blighting conditions. It's a good idea to put those dollars towards projects, mitigate those blighting conditions while the clock is moving. And a great way would be to be able to use all of those dollars just as the increment capture is being finished up. So you want to pace yourself with the projects you take on in the urban renewal plan so that you have dollars all the way through the life of the project, but you're also committing those dollars to those blight mitigation projects. So in the case of Creekside, we've got a couple of years left on there. You can see that on the green lines there. In terms of those dollars, we're projecting that out, and we think that we're going to expend all of the dollars that we collected in that area over the 25 years. So we're pacing really well. We want to keep that pace up because essentially we could have a red dot at the bottom of that. We could go into the hole. Don't want to do that. Lakewood's always been a conservative community, and so we want to come across where we have those expenditures matching up with that clock. So in the case of Colfax and Wadsworth, that's the case. We'll go ahead and put those indicators on those other areas. And you can see in Alameda 1, our clock is relatively short. We'll have some dollars in there, which means we need to get to the initiatives that will mitigate the blighting conditions coming forward. Alameda 2 looks like we're pacing real well to do the Belmar end of it. Got a few more years in that clock. And then, of course, the West Colfax corridor clock, several years in there. And our projection right now is there with some dollars that are there. So we need to, pick up the pace a little bit in that area and make those projects come together. So powers of the Urban Renewal Authority. One of the things that we can do is sue and be sued. I hope we don't use that power anytime soon, but that's one of the things that the Urban Renewal Authority can do. We can negotiate, enter into contracts, take on other actions required for urban renewal. We can help develop appropriate regulations for buildings and land use. We can survey and study blighted areas. We can borrow and invest funds. We can invest the funds that we receive from the increment capture. We can condemn property. We can acquire, manage, and dispose of property. And again, we can acquire the property without using condemnation or eminent domain. We can implement plans for repair, rehabilitation, and or demolition of buildings and improvements. We can also compensate individuals and businesses for relocation impacts. Those are those relocation policies that I mentioned at the beginning of this process. So statutory authority, basically, we summed it all up at the beginning. We'll sum it up again here. The purpose of 3125-101 is to eliminate slum and blight. Now, slum and blight are words like every other word. They have a cognitive meaning you can look up in the dictionary. They also have an emotional meaning, and people tend to attach certain emotions with those words, slum and blight. Both of those are used in the statute. Most of the time we use the word blight or blighting conditions, and those have a very specific definition under the statute. We'll talk about what that definition is in just a moment. But the purpose is to eliminate slum and blight. It's not job creation. It's not economic development. It's not an increase in the tax base. Those aren't the primary functions of the statute. But when you eliminate slum and blight, it almost always results in job creation, economic development, and increased tax revenues. That's just kind of a byproduct of making our community that much better. So some success stories, put some pictures around the horn on there. You see the Creekside project up in the upper left-hand corner. You see the plaza area at the Lra Station Plaza, Oak Street Station for the Oak Street light rail station. Down at the lower right is the Alameda Streetscape. We talked about that project just a little bit at the top of the meeting. That's one that's relatively recently completed, about a $9 million project. Used a lot of different financing mechanisms in order to make that come forward, but installed sidewalks, and gateway elements, and some other things along the Alameda corridor. And then, of course, Belmar, the Hyatt House Hotel representing Belmar. And Belmar is one of those success stories for the urban renewal. Used a lot of different financing mechanisms to make Belmar come together. A Herculean undertaking when you think about it. Replacing all of the Villa Italia Mall, essentially a brand new urban city there at Belmar. So the statutory blighting conditions, there are 11 of them. This is the definition for blighting conditions used in the statute and used for the things that we do. There are 11 of them, as I mentioned. You don't have to have all 11 of them on any one property. You just have to have 4 to 5 in the whole of the area. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But deteriorated or deteriorating structure, we know what that looks like. Buildings that are deteriorating, a defective or inadequate street layout. So the street grid's not working effectively, or it's defective in some fashion. Faulty lot layout in relation to size, adequacy, accessibility, or usefulness. That the parcels are in weird shapes. They're too small, they're too big, they're too awkwardly shaped. You can't get access to the properties. That makes them blight. Unsafe or unsanitary conditions. You can imagine what those are. A lot of times those are resulting from debris on the site, or things that are just not kosher in the site. Deterioration of the site or other improvements. So the sidewalks are coming down, parking lots are happening, lighting, signage, those kinds of things. All of the things deteriorating on those other site improvements. The unusual topography or the inadequate public improvements and utilities. Maybe the utilities are not complete, or you have a drainage issue like we talked about for the Creekside project. Maybe there's unusual topography, or there's just not public improvements. Sidewalks aren't there, that sort of thing. Defective or unusual conditions of the title. This is one that we generally don't work with too much, because these come across in title searches when properties change hands. Conditions that endanger life or property by fire or other causes. These are buildings that are downright dangerous. They could be fire hazards. Those sorts of things. Buildings that are unsafe or unhealthy for people to live or to work. That's one of the other conditions. Blighting conditions. Environmental contamination of buildings or properties. So environmental contamination is one that we work our way through. And the existence of health, safety, or welfare factors requiring high levels of municipal services, or substantial underutilization or vacancy of buildings and sites and improvement. The City Council got a presentation a few weeks ago on vacant properties. We know that they can cost the city lots of dollars, because we've got code enforcement going out there a lot. We've got police response happening in these kinds of properties. And so when that is higher, these properties are actually causing that. So statutory blighting condition, those are the 11. As I mentioned before, in order to form an urban renewal area, you have to have at least 4 of those conditions within the area. Not each property has to have them, but the area has to have them in aggregate. If we wanted to use eminent domain, we need to have 5 factors that are in there as a minimum. Most of the urban renewal areas that we have declared in the past have had 7, 8, 9 those blighting conditions happen. So thinking about if we were forming an urban renewal area, or we're looking back in history on how the urban renewal areas got formed, these are some elements that happen before what's required in the statute. One is that we informally talk with the property owners. We would talk with those property owners, and I talk to property owners every day, and they talk about what's the conditions in their area, and how are those blighting conditions affecting their property and their business. Their business interests, those sorts of things. So we talk with them and get a sense of where they're at. It also gives us an opportunity to talk about urban renewal processes and those sorts of things, so that if we're thinking about forming urban renewal areas, property owners know what that means to their properties. We can also informally observe areas of the city. When you drive around the city of Lakewood, you probably noticed areas that probably need more assistance than other areas of the city. We're looking for those areas where there's a predominance of those 11 conditions that are out there. So you think about those 11 conditions and where are those in the city? You might have some areas that come to mind right away. And we'll talk about maybe where those might be along the way. At this point, we don't have any identified. We don't have a specific map of where we'd like to maybe look at those. We just know generally where those areas are. To move forward from there, you have to identify an area to formally study. In other words, you've got to make a map and identify all of the properties that are in that area that you want to study. And when you do that, you have to inform all of the property owners of that, and you do so in a letter. And that letter generally has some very specific information that comes from the statute. So you can imagine if you get that letter in the mail and it says, hey, we're looking for blighting and slum conditions, and your property happens to be in the area where we're looking, well, that might be disconcerting. So that's one of the reasons why talking to property owners is a very important thing. Because if you just send the letter out, which is what the statute requires, without having those conversations first, it can be jarring to get. The condition survey is also known as the blight study, and it's really folks going around from the public rights of way, observing those properties and determining which of those 11 conditions, if any, or all of them are existing in that area with those properties. It's not an invasive process. So we're not digging holes or entering buildings or even entering properties. It's what you can see of those 11 conditions from the public rights of way. So we've got a hypothetical area. I put fictional example on this slide because hypothetical was too many letters to get all of that to fit on there. So it's our fictional example. The boundaries of the urban renewal area have to be drawn as narrowly as possible to achieve the goals of the Colorado urban renewal law. So got to draw it as tightly as possible. I've got this fictional example over here. We've got residential to the west of Central Avenue. And again, these are just made up streets. And then we've got mostly commercial to the west of Main Boulevard. And then we have the next community over. We can't make an urban renewal area happen in the next community over. So it has to be within Lakewood. If it's a federally owned property, we can't make it happen on federally owned property either. Generally speaking, you want to avoid putting residential properties into an urban renewal area. So generally, we've avoided that everywhere that we possibly can. And there's various and sundry reasons. We can get into that at another time. But essentially, when you're forming urban renewal areas, you generally don't want residential properties in those areas. You want commercial. So that leaves you with this fictional example between Main and Central, from roughly 0th Street all the way up through 20th Street. So we commission that blight study. It goes out into the world. Sorry, I had to check something here real quick. Goes out into the world, and we start looking at those properties to see which of those conditions that are on there. So on these properties that are labeled in green, and again, this is just a hypothetical example, maybe we find 6 or 7 of those 11 characteristics of blight in the area that we're looking at here. Maybe on these we find only 3 or 4 conditions of blight on those particular properties. And this one we find, I don't know, 9 or so conditions of blight on those properties. All of those properties together come together. So in the area, all of them together, we've got more than a sufficient number of those blighting conditions in there to be able to declare this area as blighted and form an urban renewal redevelopment plan for the area. Now you might notice there's a little bit of white in this process. Those are properties that may or may not have blighting conditions, but they could be included in the area theoretically. That blight or the whited area right there along Central Avenue where we don't have those conditions, we might form that area, the blighted area or the blighted designation area, not including those properties because we want to form it as narrowly as possible. That's what happened on Colfax when we talked about that before. A lot of properties were in that area, and then they came down in that 7 number when we got that done. So what happens to the value of the property if it's designated within an urban renewal area? Well, there have been no studies that have shown a reduction in value on there. Again, it's an urban renewal area. It's not each individual property being declared blighted. All of the properties that are in the blighted area, somewhere in that area, the conditions exist for those conditions of blight. Some studies have shown an increase because the designation of blight indicates the intention of the governing body to target blight mitigation efforts into that area, and that can increase the market perception of value. We talked about that $1 billion aggregate number of up on Colfax, but those dollars still hold up the next right after we form that urban renewal area, so that the values don't go down. With 1538 passage, I mentioned it before. Now, if new urban renewal areas are formed, we'll be putting together those intergovernmental agreements with the taxing entities. We're very happy and excited to have the taxing entities around the table right now so that we can have that conversation, but we also have to go that extra step of developing the IGAs for any new areas or if we substantially modify those areas. And that's a negotiated agreement that we talk about. That's what we would attempt to do. Historically, Lakewood's always approved blight designation at the same time as the urban renewal plan. I mentioned that before. Here's those 4 areas coming back up and the resolutions that form those areas and the approval of those plans. So all of those are there in front of you. That's where we got to those dates. And again, the statute indicates that you can collect 25 years of increment once that blight designation happens and then the urban renewal redevelopment plan has been approved. So let's talk a little bit about this, the idea of maybe there are potential future urban renewal areas. You see that kind of stick map that we talked about before with Lakewood, and just to give you that orientation on there, you see Lakewood out in front of you on the screen. The streets that run east-west, starting from the north on down. 6th Avenue is near the top, then Colfax Avenue, Alameda goes all the way down through Hampden Avenue, indicating where those are. KW and S stand for Kipling, Wadsworth, Sheridan. You see them in those areas. And so, again, at this point, we don't have any maps. We don't have anything where we're planning to go out and make these urban renewal areas happen. We really want to get the LRA together, thinking together, working together, figuring those things out as council approaches the light designations for any new areas on there. And so you might think about, where would we find a preponderance of those 11 conditions? I'm going to indicate some things on the map here. I'm going to use some kind of fuzzy colors in there because, again, no properties have been identified. One of two things generally happens when you kind of identify a specific property that might be in an urban renewal area. Folks either think, oh my gosh, the government's interested in my property. I'm going to increase the value of the property, and I'm going to sell it for a lot more money. Generally is not what actually happens in reality, but that's what a lot of people think. Or they think to themselves, no way is my property blighted, and I'm not going to let the government come in here and tell me that's the case. And so there's this kind of, oh, we don't really want you to think about those kinds of things. But we know those areas where they're at and where you might find them. So one of the areas that you might think of right off the bat is along the Sheridan corridor, along the eastern part of the city, our border with Denver in most of those places. There's some areas along there where you might think, oh, well, probably those 11 conditions might exist. Paint over here, this is generally the area around the Federal Center. There was a contemplation of doing an urban renewal area on the Federal Center back in 2015, 2016. So we've thought about it before. Maybe this would happen. Again, these are just hypothetical sorts of areas, or areas that you might look in there. And I'll let you know that we won't be able to do all of this. So we're not talking about getting all of these done. We're talking about these are the areas where we might look here in the future. Along Mississippi Avenue, there's a lot of residential along Mississippi Avenue, so that might be a little trickier because we talked about we don't want to include residential if we can at all avoid it. But there's a lot of commercial areas that are long in the tooth, and you see some of those conditions existing all along that corridor in Mississippi Avenue. And then the area around what's called Academy Park, or the old business park that was put together in the late 50s, early 60s, has been very useful through the 70s, the 80s, and 90s on to today. But you're starting to see some of those buildings deteriorate in that area down there. That might be an area where we might look somewhere in the future. Again, none of these are set. They're just areas that we're taking a look at. I want to take a moment to talk about how property valuations come together. And this may be a review for many of you on how they come together, but property values are made up of basically two things: land and improvements. So you got land and all of the things that are the improvements on that land. So we start off with that line. This is a cross section that we have there. Often it's referred to as the dirt, or the area, the actual land that it's on. That has a value. And that value continues in what's called the base. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. We could put improvements under the ground that represents some pipes and whatnot that are underneath the dirt, the water conveyance systems, dry utilities, things that are improvements in the ground. Those might go into the increment because they're improvements to the property. If they didn't exist before the urban renewal area and they were installed, that adds to the value of that increment. Thing that most people think about in terms of improvements is things that are above ground. Buildings for the most part, but sometimes landscaping and parking lots and all of the things that make properties useful. All of those things are included in the value of a property. And if you ever look at your property taxes, you'll see on the property taxes the land value, and you'll see the value of the improvements. Those are broken out. At the time the urban renewal area is formed, all of the value of the land and all the value of the improvements on the properties that are there go into what's known as the base. That's the base. That's the value of all of the properties in that area prior to forming the urban renewal area. Any improvements that are added to that over the course of the clock that's in there become part of the increment. I want to be very careful here. It's not the value or the economic value as prices rise and go up. Those things aren't the increment. The increment is really anything that's physically improving those properties that are coming up. And so as LRA commissioners, as LRA staff members, one of our goals is to try to help those properties develop that increment or create that increment, improve their properties and create property values that are going up. So both the value of the base and the increment, they increase and they decrease with the market over time. Most of the time with real estate, the properties go up over time. So the values that are going up because of the market, those are still attributed to the base or the increment based on when those improvements came into place. So a couple of key takeaways here is myths that have been out there. I've talked with folks before. It's a myth that the taxes in the base are frozen. In truth, they grow with the market values of the base. I'll put that in a graph here in just a moment, but it's a myth that they're frozen over the course of time. Another key takeaway is it's a myth that the property owners pay zero taxes. That doesn't happen. The taxing indices receive $0 or the property values go to zero. I've heard all of those before. That's simply not the way urban renewal works. It's just not the way it works. So those are the couple of myths that are on there. So let's talk about this graph. It's a hypothetical base and an increment. You can see down there in the lower left-hand corner of the graph, 0, that would be everything that happens before the 0 is what the base is happening there. And then I just put increments of $2 million just for the sake of doing this hypothetical example. So all the way up through year 0, the value of the properties in there, that's the base right there. That base remains. So if the LRA helps to facilitate some kind of incremental value to the properties, that's that area in blue. It's added on there. We build buildings, we redevelop buildings, that sort of thing. That value, it becomes the increment. As we go forward in time, you can see how the yellow is increasing because the market value is increasing. So the base value, the taxes that are associated with the base, increase over time with the value of the market. The increment also increases, but hopefully we're adding increment to properties as we go along, and that increment becomes larger and larger as we go forward through time. As we develop as we receive those incremental tax assessments as we go along, we put those dollars to work mitigating the blighting conditions, and hopefully we accelerate the redevelopment of the area as we go along. So we get all the way to year 25, and we've got the increment going up. We've got the base, and you may say, well, what happens in year 26? Well, the urban renewal area no longer collects that increment. All of the value of that increment now goes to the base. All of the taxing entities that are in that base receive those dollars. And a lot of times they use the argument of, if not but for the things that the Urban Renewal Authority has done over the course of time, that value wouldn't have risen that far. That's where you get that if not but for sort of a deal. Just a real quick reminder on how you get to property taxes. There's a market value of properties. A lot of folks look at the value of their home on one of these websites like Redfin or Zillow or that sort of a thing. That's a market value, not always accurate, but that's kind of a market value of it. The way the assessor does that is they come to an assessed value of the property. And then without going too far down that rabbit hole, has to do with the Gallagher Amendment, and residential properties are assessed at different values. Don't want to go too far into it. But then the assessed values is multiplied by the mills, divided by 1,000 to get to the annual property tax. Mills are 1,000th of a dollar. Or if you look at it another way, for every $1,000 of assessed value, if you have 1 mil, you pay $1 for that mil on those values. So taking that into some examples here. What if the authority works with the private sector to construct improvements on vacant property in the project area? Well, we'll take a look at how that would actually stack up there. So before the URA on a vacant property, maybe there's a vacant property inside the urban renewal area. It's an example in here. And we're going to say that the value is 1,000, so the math is easy to do on there. So the land is worth 1,000. There's no improvements on the property because it's vacant. The county would receive that 2624, which is about 26 mils, which is roughly the county millage in most areas. School district has 45.81 mills on there, and then the special district's 21.9. There's no increment yet because we haven't declared the urban renewal area. We haven't started developing that increment. So that's why all those are X'd out. So let's assume a year later, the market hasn't gone up very much. That makes the math easier. The land is still $1,000 on the base. The total's in there. The county still receives the 2624. School district receives those dollars in there. But we create an increment over on the other side. We create $2,000 worth of improvements over on the side there. The increment value that the county, the school district, and the special districts would normally accrue from that increment, or typically accrue from that, go to the urban renewal area for mitigating those blighting conditions. And in this case, the dollars are about $187.90. It's a roughly twice the number on there. That makes sense because we got $1,000 in the base value and we put $2,000 in the increment value. We'll do another hypothetical. If we redevelop an existing area, the base and the increment are redeveloped. So on the before side, we've got land that's $1,000. We've got $2,000 worth of improvement. Total property value is $3,000. That's what the taxing entities would collect on those dollars in the base. The increment hasn't been developed yet. If we wind up replacing those properties, this is based on the way the assessor does the assessment for the Urban Renewal Authority. We add improvements onto there that are totaled at $4,000, but there were already $2,000 worth of value in the base. That has to get subtracted out. So the total of the increment is $2,000, and you see those dollars that come to the Urban Renewal Authority over on the base side. You see that the taxing entities still receive those dollars over there. So what happens if the authority facilitates the construction of public improvements in the project area? Very similar to the Alameda Streetscape project where we put in the sidewalks, we put in the roads, we did some turn areas, we did medians in there, we improved some of the traffic conditions. Those don't have anything really to do with the base or the increment. The presence of public improvements helps mitigate blight. Those are not tax sorts of things, so those don't count in that equation of the base increment. So the public improvements help improve the area by mitigating. So why use increment at all? Why work about the TIF? A lot of times they use the word TIF in here. That stands for tax increment financing. The increment is the dollars that are collected on there. If we use some mechanism to finance based on those dollars, that's how we get to that tax increment financing or that TIF. The increment's not a new tax. There's no new tax that's associated with urban renewal. We don't go out and levy any new taxes on the area. We may need extraordinary public improvements. Our requirements may be there. We know that we have to facilitate a road from the Federal Center across to the north side of 6th Avenue. That bridge is going to be $40 or $50 million. Maybe that makes it a good place to use urban renewal. Maybe not, but maybe it does, because those extraordinary public improvement requirements may be. Another reason to use increment and TIF is because the increment doesn't increase tax rate on the existing property owners. They're paying the same millage they were paying before, but part of it is captured for one purpose and the other part is captured for the other purpose. The increment doesn't require that property area owners outside the area contribute to that urban renewal project. Again, that's the things on one side of town, not working on the urban renewal areas that are on the other side. The increment captures the additional value created by the private investment, and it gets put back into the urban renewal project area. So growth pays its own way. That's the goal of the urban renewal. So just to restate kind of how increment works, we've got a blighted property. The increment project area is created. The base is established, and those typical regular tax levies are levied on those properties, and they go where they would normally go. After redevelopment, there's an increased taxable value. The tax from that incremental value is captured and used to mitigate blighting conditions in the area. It creates a kind of a circle, if you will, that hopefully spirals upward and takes care of those blighting conditions in the area. The URA receives a share of the project property and sometimes perhaps sales taxes. 2 of our areas have sales tax revenues also included in the urban renewal area. 2 of our areas do not. The URA makes that catalyst investment, changes the conditions, changes the blighting conditions with the investment in key buildings or properties or activities that help mitigate those blighting conditions. And then the project results in an increment or a property and or sales tax that goes back into the Urban Renewal Authority. Share of that goes back. And if we use that property, we spiral upward so that we mitigate those blighting conditions in the area. So again, I mentioned one of the things that, if not but for the Urban Renewal Authority investment in the area, development just may not happen because we're doing a couple of things. We'll talk about those in a minute as well. Without the development, those blighting conditions may perpetuate or decay further. With the URA investment, development occurs, the blighting conditions are mitigated, an incremental increase is available for the URA to reinvest into that project and remedy blight. Using tax increment financing, we can go out and sell bonds and pay for those bonds with the increments over time. So we can get a lot of dollars up front, make capital improvements into the area, mitigate those blighting conditions with those improvements, and then pay back bondholders for what we use there. We can make a reimbursement agreement happen with developers. We did that in the case of the Creekside project in order to get all of the drainage mitigation and whatnot. We agreed to reimburse the redevelopers of that area for a certain period of time till we reach the cap. Other methods, we can go out and borrow money. That's what we did with the betterment improvement of the Oak Street station and the Wadsworth station. We borrowed money. We refinanced that 2 times. Haven't increased the length of time on there, but we've managed to buy better interest rates as interest rates have gone down over the years. So those methods allow for us to better utilize those funds to keep those improvements and those mitigation of those blighting conditions in those areas around the west light rail stations better. That but-for analysis that we talked about before, how do you know that an activity is appropriate for supporting through the tax increment that is captured? Well, you have to have that urban renewal plan already adopted and in place. The proposed activity is consistent with those plan goals, and the activity would not occur absent the tax increment support. So if not but for that investment, that activity wouldn't take place. The urban renewal statute, it doesn't require that the improvements be public in order to receive that tax increment, only that they remedy blight. So again, all about that blight remedy. Another way that you can determine whether the TIF should be used to finance activities or in the area is if it mitigates the blight and it provides public benefit, and there's a significant gap between the total project cost and the anticipated return. So example of that is the demolition of the existing structures at the CU Health Center at 9th and Colorado. A lot of existing buildings that need to come down. That gap created by that financial hardship is something that urban renewal was able to come in and work with. Maybe there's a landfill or contamination down in Castle Rock, or the Gates project over there on Broadway was one where environmental conditions need to be mitigated as well. And those took blighting conditions out of the community and made it possible to redevelop those areas. Maybe there's oversized or regional infrastructure that's needed in order to mitigate those blighting circumstances for that area they're in there. So where we wind up operating is kind of the area between the statutory authority. That's what the statute gives us the ability to do as the urban renewal authority. So all of the people around this digital table, all of the commissioners here have the statutory authority to do something about it. I like to think of this as agency. We have the capacity, the ability to do something about those blighting conditions on there. On the other side is political will, and I think that's where I like to think of that as determination. We have a desire to do something to mitigate those blighting conditions. We have that political will, and where those two things overlap, that's where we do our best work in the authority, or at least that's where I feel that it all comes together. So when that agency meets up with that determination and we fix blighting conditions in the area, that's when urban renewal really has an effect. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about property acquisition. It's a hypothetical situation. We're going to put some squares up on the screen in there. You've got Main to the north that's running from east to west, and you see West Street and East Street. These are just blocks that are on here. So imagine, if you will, for just a moment, that these are properties as seen from above, as if you would see them on a map, and each of these properties is a little less than an acre in size. Maybe C is around a little bit more than an acre, but A and B are less than an acre, D and E are less than an acre, G and F are right around that acreage mark. You see this condition happening in a lot of urban areas. See this on Colfax happening a lot, where you've got small properties all along the area there, and things start to redevelop within the context of that small envelope, and you don't get that catalytic change into the area. So for example, maybe A comes up for sale, but B and C aren't for sale at that time. So we do something, or the private sector does something on A that works or doesn't work for some length of time. B comes up for sale, but A is still trying to make it. And so it doesn't quite work out. So all the properties turn at different times, and you wind up with those conditions, and you can think about them in your own head, where those are the things where you see one kind of business or one kind of use in there for a while, a year and a half, 2 years, that sort of thing, just doesn't quite make it. The building becomes perpetually vacant or frequently vacant. We wind up with all of the difficulties that vacant buildings pose. The building right next to it still trying to operate, so on and so forth. What can happen is we can go in and acquire them strategically. Maybe each of these properties is $2 million in value, and the Urban Renewal Authority doesn't have $10 million to get all 5 of those properties up front. But could we strategically acquire B for a very short period of time? We don't want to land bank it for a long period of time. We want to hold on to it so that we can help with the assemblage of the property, because now with B, we can influence A and C. And so if A comes up for sale and B's in the mix over there, we start to aggregate the size of that property so that we can do something more significant. We can mitigate the blighting conditions on there. We bought B, maybe we demolish a building on B that's creating problems because it's frequently vacant. So we get rid of that building for a short period of time, and then maybe we can put together a project where A, B, and C all come together, and then you've got something in. You've got close to a full 3 acres to work with to do something in. If we strategically obtain D for a short period of time, we not only influence C in this case, but we also influence E and F. So maybe we can make that catalytic sort of change happen with those private properties simply by acquiring the property for a short period of time. The value of that property still is the value of that property. We still try to get that value out on the open market. So it's not like we're giving that property away, nor are we trying to make money off the property. We're not speculating on the property. We're not holding it and trying to wait for the market to go way up so we can sell it for a lot more dollars. We're really trying to facilitate the mitigation of those blighting conditions. That's what it's all about. I mentioned at the top that we have a couple of relocation policies. We may want to do that, but it allows the LRA to compensate property owners that are displaced as a result of the acquisition of properties. The LRA has adopted 2 relocation policies in the past. And those were for the Belmar area, Belmar proper, when we were relocating folks out of the Villa Italia Shopping Center into that Belmar project or elsewhere. And then the LRA also did that for Colfax and Wadsworth, some of the properties that are out there. So we have reached the check-in point. I've spent almost an hour going over a lot of this information. There's a lot of density in here. We know that. The idea wasn't to overwhelm people or do anything like that. It's to get all of these concepts up on the table so that we can start talking about it. I think I talk for the staff when I say we're excited to have all of the right folks with a seat at the table to start talking about that, and having all of these taxing entities helping us mitigate blighting conditions in the city of Lakewood. So happy to talk about how we do that now. I'm going to throw it back to Chair Paul, if you would like. We've got the Alameda 1 reinvestment area. We've got Nicole Stair from our finance department can go through about 4 or 5 slides specifically on the conditions over there. Or we can hold off now, talk about questions, talk about discussion, come back to that Alameda 1, or as I may have mentioned at the top, if we decided we've got too much going on tonight, we want to bite off less this evening, we can push that into a study session in the future. So with that, that's the end of the first part of this first section of the presentation, and I would defer back to you, Chairman Paul.
Great. Thank you very much. Nicely done. A lot of information. Why don't we check in right now and we'll do some questions. And then if we don't have a bunch, we can see if we can hammer into the second phase of Alameda 1. So right now, everybody has raise their hand button if you'd like to weigh in. And first up, I have Commissioner Abel.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question about the process. When council was discussing this and the new positions, the unanimous consensus of council was that we would give a permanent seat to the fire department, and there was no mention of the special seat that was added that Ms. Barroway is going to occupy. So I am concerned that we got those backwards. I mean, it's fine that we have the special seat, but we need, the idea was, and council's support was for a permanent seat for the fire district. Is there a response to that? I have a couple more things here.
So I think the at-large seat is directed by the mayor and adopted by the city council, which was done last week. And that's where Miss Barraway came from.
Where was that? I don't, where does the mayor have that power?
According to, I believe
what
it's
about
the
the consensus from the last council that it be done, that the fire department get the main seat or get the permanent seat?
So we have a fire department representative.
Yes, we do. And she's representing the special districts.
And
We
I
do.
don't,
The call was for a permanent seat for the fire department. Also, how long are the terms of the new representatives?
so I will just reiterate, I don't think that there was a consensus on a permanent seat. The fire department's representative, and according to state statute, the mayor recommends a seat that was voted on, and I think voted on by you, Councilor Abel, last week to include Ms. Barraway. As far as terms go, Mr. Smith, do you have the terms?
The terms are based on, because of the way the statute reads. And so the statute reads that those four positions are allowed. 2022-25, the resolution that was on there allows for that appointment of that last seat, and that the special districts are represented by state statute. And so they've gone through a process, and I'm very thankful that they've gone through that process and brought the fire department representative, or excuse me, the fire district representative up on there. The terms of those are based on the terms that the individuals on those elected positions have. So, for example, Susan Miller has a term on the school board, and that holds up there. The term for the special representative is supposed to coincide with the terms of the mayor, so that there's a 4-year increment. And so as a mayor comes in and appoints that council of that representative, council approves that representative. Their 4-year term is the max that it happens as the mayor's on. And they can be reappointed, but the reality is that every mayor's term, they new representative.
Thank you. And again, Mayor, maybe you need to go back and look at that previous meeting from the other council when the fire department was suggested as a permanent replacement.
Okay. Please, and we have a few more hands up.
I believe that's going to be it for me right now. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Miller, welcome. Good evening. Looks like, can you unmute? We're not hearing you. Shows that you're green, so it looks like maybe.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, my Zoom is always messed up. Thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Smith. Greatly appreciated, very comprehensive. I just had a really quick question on the bonding capacity and the process. Is it approved, say, for example, that a project is a $10 million need and we can bond for that? Does this authority have the authorization to pass that resolution and seek bonding authority, or does it have to be approved by this as well as the city council in terms of process?
The Urban Renewal Authority can approve that bonding measure. And so if a bonding measure was to come before this board, all of those elements would be described as to what exactly we were bonding for, but the LRA can bond.
Great, thank you very much.
Commissioner Jensen?
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. So I have a question about the specific area. Is staff looking at creating a new blight zone? And are there any developers, or which developers have approached the staff, any staff, to create an urban renewal area?
The areas that we contemplated in the past or may contemplate in the future, kind of we outlined sort of on the general sort of a thing, but at this point, we don't have a mapped out area. Developers sometimes talk to us about urban renewal, but generally speaking, they don't bring that up. They're finding ways to make their projects work. If it makes some sense, then maybe that comes up and they ask about the ability to do that. But for the most part, we don't have any specific areas identified, and we don't have any developers walking in the door saying, hey, we need to create an urban renewal area in this specific place.
Okay, thanks. I have another question. And what happens if the developer goes belly up before the reimbursement? What goes on with that?
There's a whole host of things. I mean, you're giving a kind of a generalized sort of a thing. If the developer goes belly up before they complete the redevelopment project, you mean?
Yeah. No, I think I'm just, yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Okay, well, if that's the case, the redevelopment project doesn't happen within the area. If we've committed dollars to that in some fashion or another, all of those dollars, in at least the way I would propose to do those kinds of things, is based on the performance. So they have to complete the project to get it done. If they don't complete the project and they don't get it done, then they haven't met their performance expectations, and therefore the dollars that we might commit to that wouldn't be on the table. But again, that's a very hypothetical.
Yeah, I was just thinking if we put the money into it, do you get the money out, or you're going to have to go after that? I don't know. I'm just hypothetically thinking. So I'm not feeling so good. So I'm going to forget questioning. Thanks.
You bet. In general, we're always trying to look out for the interest of making sure those dollars do the job that they're supposed to be doing. And so it's our obligation to try to present projects or initiate, activities and those sorts of things that do meet that muster, that don't wind up going belly up, or that create problems, or we invest in things that don't happen. We don't want to do that. I certainly wouldn't recommend a project that would do that, or activity that would do that.
Commissioner Wolfram, welcome.
Hi, thank you. And thank you for the presentation. And I just had a very simplistic question. Can you just go over again how the base increases? I get the increment increasing, right? But I didn't know how exactly how the base increased in value. Oh, you're on mute.
You bet. The base increase is with market value. So the assessment comes along. So a house that was worth, let's say for the sake of example, $100,000 in year one, over the course of 5 years, maybe it's now worth $120,000 or $130,000. That additional $30,000 of that in the base value still is part of the base. So the base increases with the market value of the property. The increment value also increases over time. So if you build a building that becomes more valuable over the 25 years, and that's what we generally hope for. We hope the economy goes the right direction for all of those years, and the values of those properties go up. The base value also goes up with the market conditions, and therefore the taxes collected in that base also go up, not in terms of the millage, but in terms of the total value.
Sorry, thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Okay, and I see Mr. Hoffman, you put your camera on. I'm not sure if you wanted to weigh in on any of these questions, but welcome to you as well as our counsel.
Thank you, sir.
Our advisor. Yep. All right, Commissioner Springsteen.
So I'm coming into this a little bit confused because I've had some technical difficulties that I could not get help with, as usual. But my understanding is that we are appointing members through the mayor, and I am seeing that the fire district is a member. Can somebody explain this, please, so I can comment on that?
Mr. Smith, do you want to reiterate the Senate bill or the House bill that created the 5 positions
That in the urban renewal law, it allows, or the statute allows for the creation of 4 positions. In fact, it requires that for the expansion of the board. The first 3 are very specifically outlined inside the statute. Has to be a representative from the county, has to be a representative from the school district, and that school district member has to be a board member as well. There has to be a representative from the special districts or the taxing districts that are there. And those taxing districts, they put together the program for who they would like to have go forward. But it has to be from a member of one of their boards going forward. And then that creates an even number, which is not ideal for most boards. You want to have that uneven number so you don't wind up with ties and that sort of thing. So the statute provides for a 4th position in order to create an odd number, 15. And that position through the statute is appointed by the mayor with the consent of the council.
Okay, so it requires the consent of the council, but appointed by the mayor, correct? So I'm looking at this list, complete nepotism, right? Cindy Barraway, former city councilor, tried to illegally get me to resign from council 2 years ago because...
Okay, Commissioner, we're going to keep this on a high level. These are all professionals here, and we're not going to air grievances.
I get to finish.
I would ask you that you keep your questions relevant to the topic that we're dealing with tonight.
This is nepotism, okay? So,
I will address that because I appointed Commissioner.
One of your best friends, Mayor.
So the commissioners appointed
not nepotism to this board.
So the commissioners picked the commissioner that they wanted on this board. I wish that you would do your research and learn about this process before you come to the meetings.
I am learning about the process as I am being told that this is your choice and that we are supposed to sign off on this. And
Commissioner Kerr is not my choice. Commissioner
nepotism.
Kerr is the choice of the county commissioners. Commissioner Barraway lives in an urban renewal area and has an office in another urban renewal area.
Can you explain how you chose Commissioner Barraway then, please?
I just told you.
What were your other options, Mayor?
So Commissioner Barraway has extensive experience and background in this as a former city council member. She has been active on West Colfax, which has been one of our longest serving urban renewal areas. She lives on Colfax. She also operates a business in Belmar, which is another urban renewal area.
And she is your puppet, correct?
Okay, well, that's insulting to our commissioners. And I would ask that you please keep the conversation with questions regarding the presentation this evening.
Okay, please tell me, Mayor, who else was on the list besides Ms. Barraway?
Okay. Do you have any questions related to the presentation that Mr. Smith just gave us?
This is nepotism. I would like to know in a public meeting who else was on the list besides Ms. Barraway.
Okay.
Who did you choose from?
If you don't have any other questions, I'm going to go to...
So she was the only one on the list, I can presume.
Okay.
Would you please answer yes or no, Mayor, in a public meeting?
So do you have any questions related?
Was there any other candidate, Mayor?
The candidate that was brought forth is very well qualified and suited for this position. And yes, there were other people that I spoke to and that were recommended as well. So
how many?
Okay.
How many?
Commissioner? I'm not going to continue.
Nepotism.
Thank you. We appreciate your comment.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate your nepotism.
Commissioner Jensen?
So do we know how much West Metro lost in the revenue due to the Belmar project for tax increment financing? And I just want to let you know that there's something wrong with the Zoom too. It's going in and out.
Okay. So, Commissioner Jensen, I don't know. I think that, I mean, Mr. Smith has an answer. Certainly, we can get that. We also know that there was a agreement made with West Metro Fire as to a share back, and I'm not sure if we have all those numbers. But Mr. Smith, if you'd like to answer.
The short answer is I don't have that number here, and loss is not exactly the way it is. The statute allows for that increment capture. If we're looking at how much the West Metro Fire's millage contributed to that increment, we probably can look back and get those numbers. And I'm sorry, did you say a specific area, or because we do, as the mayor mentioned, we do have a share back with the fire folks. We developed that, and I think it's been somewhat innovative. I know our folks, our colleagues up in Wheat Ridge, do a similar thing with the West Metro Fire, and they have been on the kind of the leading edge of working with urban renewal areas for quite some time. But I don't have that number specifically in front of me.
Okay, thanks.
And Commissioner Jensen, again, that's a great question. This lends itself or leads itself to why we're here tonight, because in the past, in urban renewal, these are what the reforms are born from, to make sure that these taxing entities had a seat at the table and could be part of the conversation. It was somewhat unique when West Metro was at the table years ago when this was set, but that was really the goal of why we're here tonight, to make sure these folks are here in these conversations if and when things like this go forward.
Yeah, I guess it was the Belmar project. Sorry, I thought I said that.
No, you did. You did.
Oh, I did. Okay, thanks.
You're good. All right, commissioners, just to do a quick check-in, and I know that we have a hand up in the audience as well, and I think it might have been a typed question, but we'll get to public input and see if we can answer that. It is 8:25. We have a few more slides if we want to go into the next phase. I'll just do a quick consensus. Do you want to continue moving forward at this time? I'm getting some yeses. Okay. Mr. Smith, we're going to keep on rocking and rolling.
That sounds great. Can I ask Mr. Rob to promote up on Nicole Stair? She's from our finance department and is our revenue manager on the Lakewood side. And she's developed some slides for each of the 4 areas. And the idea is to talk a little bit about the structure of those 4 areas. One of the things that we can do with this, or one of the things that we're hoping to accomplish with talking about each of these areas, is to point out how they can be structured very differently. So if we were to move forward with a new area, the structure of that area can be different than the structures that we've used in the past. They can be the same as the structures that we've used in the past, but in order to get there, we need to have some level of understanding what those structures look like. So Nicole and I haven't rehearsed this yet over Zoom, so she's up forward here. What I'm going to go ahead and do is share my screen, if that's all right.
Okay.
And then I'll click for you, Nicole. Will that work for you?
Good evening.
Yes, please.
So we will do that. Give me just a second to share the screen once again.
And we will just take a minute to welcome you, Ms. Stair. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, can we see the screen that says the discussion questions? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so we will move on here. Give me just a second. I got to clear one other thing. And so this is where it starts, Nicole. So if you just tell me when you'd like me to advance the slide, I'm happy to do it.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Nicole Stair. I'm the revenue manager here at the City of Lakewood. Robert has done a great job of presenting kind of the in-depth details of the LRA and all the different pieces of it. I will be discussing West Alameda Corridor Renewal Area, Phase 1, also known as Alameda 1 tonight. There might be some information that I will repeat, but I think that information is important just to kind of have a good understanding of the process. And if you want to go to the next slide. So in 1997, Lakewood voters approved the formation of Lakewood Urban Renewal Authority. The authority that was created is called Lakewood Reinvestment Authority, or LRA. The formation was in accordance with the Colorado Urban Renewal Law. Urban renewal laws allow municipal governments to engage in urban renewal projects to improve blighted areas. Through planning and public improvements, urban renewal projects encourage reinvestment within targeted areas of Lakewood to enhance, preserve, and restore the city's vitality and quality of life in the area. LRA is authorized to borrow money, issue bonds, and accept grants from public and private sources. The LRA's primary goals are to mitigate blight, facilitate private investments, engage Lakewood's ability to preserve and restore vitality and quality of life. Next, please. Some financing elements is that the most common financing tools are tax increment financing, or TIF, which can be sales tax or property tax or both. TIF revenue can be used to construct new streets, add upgraded streetlights, parking facilities, and sidewalks. Revenue can also be used for building facade improvements, parking, art parks, plazas, and other public amenities. TIF is an additional revenue that is generated from the redevelopment. The revenue is used to fund projects within the renewal area. The funds can be retained by the LRA for up to 25 years. Another financing tool is public improvement fees, or PIF. PIF is a fee that is collected by the retailer from the customer on the retail price of goods in the renewal area to pay for the redevelopment. Revenue generated by PIF is used to reimburse the redeveloper for public improvements. The redeveloper may continue the PIF to maintain public improvements. Next. So in 1998, redevelopment and rehabilitation within the Alameda 1 renewal area was undertaken by the LRA, and the City Council adopted the West Alameda Avenue Corridor Urban Redevelopment Plan. Lakewood Reinvestment Authority is the public partner for the redevelopment, and the objectives of this particular redevelopment plan was to mitigate blight, promote a distinct Lakewood identity, and strengthen the positive perception of the city's image, promote economic vitality, local employment, and investment of commercial and industrial areas. All public assistance to the developer is tied directly to public and/or public-related improvements. Examples of public improvements made to Alameda 1 are drainage and stormwater system, sewer improvements, pedestrian paths and bridges, retaining walls, power line relocation, and more. LRA has designed 2 project areas or phases. Project area phase 1 includes most of the urban redevelopment plan area, excluding what is now Belmar. And then project area phase 2 was later included in the increment area by amendment, which will be presented separately next month. Next. Alameda 1 renewal area is in central Lakewood. On the map, it is the area outlined in red. Again, as Robert explained, that the area includes Ellison Parkway on the west, Bayard Street on the north, Sheridan on the east, and Mississippi, Virginia, and Center Avenue on the south. And in this phase, Belmar is not included. Next. To encourage redevelopment, the West Alameda Avenue Corridor Urban Development Plan was approved by City Council in 1998. The conclusion of the plan is 25 years from the plan approval, or 2023. Next. So here is the flow of the transactions. Starting with the orange rectangles, someone makes a purchase from the retailer located in the West Alameda Avenue corridor. The retailer collects the price of the purchase plus sales tax, and then the retailer remits Lakewood sales tax on the Lakewood return. In the diamond, Lakewood determines if sales tax increment base has been met. The base is the amount of sales tax generated in the area prior to the redevelopment. If the base has not been met, sales tax is retained by the city. Once the base has been met, the remaining sales tax becomes the sales tax increment and is transferred to the LRA. So for example, hypothetically, the base is $500,000. So far in the year, Lakewood has received $475,000 in sales tax. Lakewood receives an additional $75,000 in sales tax. Therefore, $25,000 moves to Lakewood's funds. And now that the base has been met, the remaining $50,000 in the city is the sales tax increment. Therefore, Lakewood transfers $50,000 to the LRA. And then there it transfers into the LRA. And then on the property side piece, on the bottom orange rectangle represents the property owners located in the renewal area that pay property tax to Jefferson County. And the county distributes the funds to the associated districts. Jeffco calculates the property tax increment and sends the funds to the city of Lakewood. The LRA then distributes both the sales tax and the property tax to the areas including Alameda Business Improvement District, Streetscape Project, and part of the property tax increment to the redeveloper of Belmar to assist in repayment of Alameda 2 project. Next. The benefits of the redevelopment of Alameda 1 renewal area include improved character environment in the area, the Cornerstone project, which included roadway improvements, sidewalks, and neighborhood centers, Streetscape project, which was street and walkway beautification. Sales in the renewal area have increased from $67 million in 1998 to $94 million in 2021. Through the 2021, the amount invested in the area included sales tax increment and property tax increment was $24 million. So the next steps for this area is to work and plan projects to continue to mitigate blight and plan for managing Alameda 1 reinvestment area after the increment capture has concluded. And that's the finance piece of it. Is there any questions I can answer on this subject?
Great, thank you very much. So Commissioner Oliver, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. You can hear me, right? Yeah. Okay. You just said that sales tax or sales in the renewal area, or was it sales tax? I didn't write it down right. Went from 67 million in 98 to I didn't get the rest, but a lot more last year. That's kind of meaningless to me as a number because just inflation alone is going to cause a huge increase in that. So, I mean, did you compare that to other areas that were not under urban renewal? You know, I mean, did you? In other words, it looks like just a number that's not so meaningful, really, to me.
That does make sense with the economy increasing. That is definitely part of that increase in sales, but from studies, some studies say that the increase does happen after a urban renewal place, but I do agree that it's probably a good idea to look at other areas to see if what kind of actual increase we could assume from the urban renewal plan. And I can do that.
Okay, are there other questions? Okay, Commissioner Springsteen.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to get my head around what is going on with all of this. And I'm remembering that Ms. Barraway was one of the first people to call for my resignation after somebody in my family was almost killed by the fire department.
Okay, Commissioner, we're gonna stick to this presentation this evening.
I'm trying to understand how.
Listen, I explained the process to you. I explained the process.
In this process, who tried to kill a member of my family to get me to resign. So allegedly.
Point of order,
I'm
Mayor, I thought this was the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority. This sounds like something that would be
off
topic.
I don't understand why why you have the floor right now, because I do.
I brought a point of order.
Is Robert's Rules of Order. Commissioner
Oh.
Springsteen, you are out of order with this. We are having a conversation about this.
I'm calling out your nepotism. And
Okay.
so you're going to say I'm out of order.
So
Of course.
Commissioner, your concerns are noted previously by what you've said. Thank you. Commissioner Stewart, your hand is up.
Thanks. I am curious, since the increment capture in this particular corridor is going to be up next year, is that area then no longer going to be designated urban renewal? Is the blight designation going to go away along with the urban renewal status or the increment capture?
That's a great question.
Okay,
That's a great question, but the answer to that is that the blight designation stays in place until there's some reason to change that blight designation. The increment capture finishes after 25 years of capturing that increment in there. So part of the things that we need to do as good managers of these areas is to relate to how that area is going to we continue the blight mitigation efforts in the area if there is still blight mitigation to be done, absent the increment change or the increment capture.
Okay, Commissioner Wolfram.
Yes, Commissioner Stewart, I think your question kind of gets to a question I was wondering about, which is like, do you implement ways to measure, like, let's say you've got 4 areas of blight that you just, or 4 areas of that, right, that you decide are blight, right? Do you have ways to measure whether or not that blight has been fully mitigated within that 25 years? And then what if it's, for whatever reason, it's not? I mean, is that a system you implement, or do you just decide after, how is after 25 years, I guess the improvements measured? Do you know what I'm getting at?
I do understand what you're getting at. And typically we don't wind up with another blight study that says, oh, before we had, 9 characteristics of blight, now we don't have as many characteristics of blight after doing it. It's done somewhat intuitively over the course of that 25 years. What the LRA is mostly focused on is that urban renewal redevelopment plan. Did we execute all of the elements that were in that plan over the course of time? Because that plan is designed to mitigate all of those blighting conditions. If there are still things left to be done, maybe we can continue that on absent that tool, the increment capture tool. There may be other ways to get those things done as we go along there. But it really is measured against the elements of the plan, not necessarily against those characteristics after the completion of the increment capture.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Olver.
Thanks. Same question almost, but Robert, doesn't something stay blighted or have a blight designation until City Council passes a resolution that removes it? I mean, won't it stay there forever? That's my understanding right now.
Yes, once the area has been blighted is designated as blighted, that's the designation that's on that area until some other act changes that designation. So,
right. So forever, unless something, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Abel.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Smith, I thought the purpose of redevelopment was to cure blight. If we never declare blight cured, then what's the result?
Well, the result is the implementation of the plan. And certainly just because most urban renewal areas don't declare unblightedness or go back and do it, doesn't mean that it can't be done. It's just that it's typically not done or hasn't been done in the past.
I thought it was done pro forma just because it's been rebuilt. Has a new pretty face put on it and is producing revenue again at the levels of that would be expected from similar businesses in any part of town. So I thought the blight designation died with the tax increment financing.
It does not.
Should we then start pronouncing blight cured in places like Belmar? Because I don't see blight over there anymore.
That would be a topic that could be taken up by the LRA or the city council or both.
Thank you.
Commissioner Olver.
Following up again, for those commissioners who are not part of Lakewood City Council or don't follow our meetings, I did actually ask the city to look into preparing some areas which we could move away from being blighted, whatever you want to call it. So that's a Lakewood thing. So you guys don't really need to worry about that too much. But we are looking at that, I think.
Okay. I don't have any more hands up. As far as this group goes, I know, Mr. Smith, we do have those dates scheduled out, and maybe you want to touch on those again. And I know our other folks are our newly joining group have school board meetings, fire board meetings, and commissioners meetings, although the commissioners meet in the morning, which is probably nice for Commissioner Kerr to hang out late Monday nights. But just want to make sure and touch a point as far as we're just going forward with what we've scheduled, if that seems amenable, and maybe that's already been done, that's been calendared for this group.
The short answer is that we have tentatively calendared these things.
Okay.
We want to get some input from the group. I'm kind of moving backwards through my slides on the other screen here so I can get the dates, because I don't want to say the dates that are on there. But they're the ones that we mentioned previously. Sorry, it's taking me a second to go back through the slide.
It's okay. I think it's. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The study session scheduled for the 19th is on the LRA budget. And that would be during the normal council meeting. The way we've got it set up right at the moment is a joint meeting between the LRA and the city council for that particular meeting to go through the study session. The study session would include the elements of the Lakewood budget, the city of Lakewood budget, as well as then the LRA operating budget. The resolution for that is scheduled for the 17th, which is also the date that it's been set up so that the city can or the city council can approve the city budget, assuming that that's where we're at that particular time. So those two dates are set up, and then we set up just kind of a test date, if you will, for the 26th of September, which is a Monday evening, a study session that happens earlier in the evening. We've got it set for 5:30 right at the moment to go over a couple of the other areas in here as Ms. Stair has gone through the Alameda 1 area. So to go through the other 3 or 2 or 3 during that study session. That's what we've got set up right now. As I mentioned, we'll have to schedule at least one other business meeting during the year, and so some input from the commissioners would be helpful in terms of how do we go about doing that. Typically, we've always done it in conjunction with the city council.
Okay. So, is there any questions from our new members as to that schedule for now?
Just a real quick question. Do you need us to get back to you, Mr. Smith, about Mondays, or could I just tell you Mondays are fine for me? Or how do you want us to respond to your calendaring?
Happy to have your input anyway. So just you're mentioning it right now that Mondays work out. That's helpful for figuring out how we move forward on that. So thank you for sharing that piece of information.
And as somebody who does have a day job, those happen in the evening. That's correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And will they always be Zoom, or are you thinking of bringing back? I'm just thinking I travel and Zoom is nice for me, but just wanting to know if that's still flexible.
Yeah, at the moment, we're intending to have LRA meetings convened via Zoom. And part of the reason for that is that with 15 commissioners, we don't have a council chamber that will accommodate 15 folks up on the dais, right? at the moment. So how we would physically schedule that or, put that together is a little up in the air. I know our friends in Commerce City or our colleagues in Commerce City struggled with that for a little while in terms of being able to figure out how to do that. Our solution was to do them via Zoom for the foreseeable future. At some point, it would be nice to get to in-person meetings, but at this point, we thought about that.
Okay. So we have a public input portion, and we'll go ahead and open that. And I know that we had a question that came in that I see, and I'm not sure, Mr. Smith, if you can see that from Mr. Conway, and he had raised his hand too, and I imagine it might be in related to this, but for those that do want to weigh in, you can press *9 to request to speak and *6 to unmute. You'll have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when you're about at 30 seconds and ask you to wrap up when your time is up. If anybody wishes to raise their hand now, if not, Mr. Smith, you want to try, or can you address the question that came in from Mr. Conway? You are muted, so I'll go ahead and just bring Mr. Conway over to answer or to participate in this portion.
Yeah, I apologize. I can't see the question though. I apologize. Okay. I was muted.
No worries. All right, Mr. Conway, looks like you're ready to go. We'll give you your 3 minutes. If you give us your address or ward, we'll start you.
Thanks, Adam. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name's Craig Conway. I have a residence in Ward 2, which is also known as I believe the West Colfax corridor. The reason I've been interested in this meeting is because over the last 3 years, I've been receiving increasing communications from both Mr. Smith's office as well as their partner developers that are interested in my property. The developer currently owns 80% of my property and is trying to acquire the remaining percent. When I received a call 3 years ago, the week before Christmas, and the city started talking about eminent domain and seizing my home, I've been increasingly concerned, and that developer has continued to put pressure on us to lower the sale of our house to nearly half of the market value. And their pressure is that they say if we don't sell to them cheaper, that the city will just seize our home. And I've continued to receive those communications within the last month. My question today is, so if the city does decide to help a developer, take possession of a property, what kind of approval process, would be shared with the commissioners, the city council, or just the city manager's office to validate that project plan? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else in the queue wish to weigh in? Okay. All right, and thank you, Mr. Conway. I know you've been in communication with your council members as well as myself and our staff. And just to clarify, Mr. Smith, maybe you can, because this is very serious, that the city's not sending any sort of communication to try to acquire that property. And so if we want to just clarify, that's really important and can be very scary, and want to make sure that the community feels comfortable. Mr. Smith?
Oh, you bet. Mr. Conway and I have talked a couple of times over the last few years about the property. His property is located in the West Colfax corridor urban renewal area. And we've talked about eminent domain as an exercise or I should say a process that could be under use at some point in the future. But I've tried to be implicitly clear with him and with others that there is no eminent domain action right now in front of the group or with regard to the property there. There is development property, or excuse me, developers working out in that area on projects in that area. Mr. Conway just suggested that we have a partner developer out there. We do not, and we continue to work to try to help development happen and blight mitigation happen within those areas. So you're right, it is very serious, and I have communicated, I believe, several times with Mr. Conway that The city doesn't have an intention to seize his home anytime in the near future.
Okay. All right, Mr. Abel, your hand is up.
Yes, sir. It seems to me that when the city passed its urban redevelopment authority approval, that Councilwoman Bonnie Allison offered an amendment that said no private homes would be taken for urban renewal. And as far as I know, that was passed. So what has happened there? And one of our, just to add a little context here, Frank Gray, our former head of, I believe, planning or community resource planning, I believe, said that, was asked, what's it like to negotiate with someone under the threat of eminent domain? And he said, it's like negotiating with somebody who's going to die at dawn. That is why Ms. Allison threw out that amendment. And as you know, council, I don't believe, has ever authorized eminent domain to take a private home, except for, in fact, has never done so. There was a rock house taken over at the Creekside development, but that was a market rate transaction that was negotiated between the homeowner and the LRA. So I'd sure like to know how private homes got included into the mix here. Thank you.
So I would venture to guess that this urban renewal area has some private residents, but to your point, and certainly in my almost 16 years, I don't think we've ever exercised eminent domain except for on a friendly basis. And that was one of those one-off properties. So this is a more unique one that I think is causing certainly some heartburn for our resident. And I know Mr. Smith is working on that. And I'm not sure as to the amendment, if our legal team can certainly look into that. That's something that we could do. But also, Mr. Smith, it's clear to say there's not a project happening that the city is even part of on this, correct?
Correct.
Right. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments from the group? So I would just certainly like to thank everyone. As you can see, that this is not a challenge. This is not an easy issue. And it's something that certainly has impacts for our community for 20, 30, 40 years. And so I appreciate your willingness to serve on this and to really look at the future of our community and where we want to see it go and how we want to see it move. And so there'll be some tough conversations ahead of us. And I think everybody's up for the task. And so in the meantime, before we meet again, if you do have further questions as to this process, as to projects, as to things that have happened, please feel free to reach out to our staff folks, to Mr. Smith, and we can make sure that you get all the information that you need. And as somebody who, again, who's been through this many times, it can be very confusing in these different buckets and how these things work and the timeframes and TIF and PIF. And certainly what we just heard from a concerned community member. So I appreciate everybody's time and certainly want to, again, welcome those folks who are on board. And we are excited to have you and look forward to our next meeting. So we'll adjourn this meeting at 9 p.m. Thank you.